Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to A Case for Basic Income for the Arts, a community session hosted by Basic Income Calgary and the Ontario Basic Income Network. My name is Matt Ewens. I'm with Basic Income Calgary, and I'll be your MC for today. Before we really get into everything, we would like to ensure that this webinar is as inclusive as possible. So this webinar is actually supported through American Sign Language and closed captioning. In order to follow the ASL interpreters, and we actually have two of them today, we recommend that you pin the ASL interpreter to your Zoom screen using the three dots by their names, so you can always view the interpretation. So as I mentioned, we do have the two ASL interpreters, and they're labeled as ASL number 1 and ASL number 2. We also have captioning embedded into this Zoom, and you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen in order to show those captions at the bottom of your screen. As I said, this presentation is brought to you by Basic Income Calgary, Enough for All, which is Calgary's poverty strategy, and the Ontario Basic Income Network. And we're very proud and pleased to be sponsored by Calgary Arts Development. We're very thankful for their sponsorship for this webinar, as well as the Disability Action Hall. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. So let's just take a quick moment for territorial acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, create, and play on Indigenous lands, both unceded lands as well as within the 11 numbered treaties. So while today I'm actually coming to you from Treaty 7, which is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda nations, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3, I encourage you all to reflect upon the traditional peoples of the lands and waters on which you find yourself today. So it wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't talk about the technology. So how to communicate today. So participant audio and video has been disabled. However, please feel free to use the chat function to chat with panelists, participants, and also use the questions feature to ask our guests questions. And we do have a good Q&A session today with our fantastic guests. Now, it wouldn't be a Zoom call if some technical difficulties didn't occur as well. So if you are having tech problems, use the raise your hand feature, and two of our behind the scenes superstars, you'll see them labeled as BIC, that's Basic Income Calgary, Hajir, and then BIC Colleen will be with you to help. And if you get disconnected, feel free to use the exact same URL that you used to access this webinar. And if you need extra support, feel free to email calgary@basicincomealberta.ca. And of course, this webinar is being recorded as well. And the intent is that we'll actually be producing a video which will be up on YouTube, freely available, as well as we will be sharing a copy of today's slides with all of the links embedded. And that will be sent up as a follow-up email to everyone who joined us today. So I do also want to quickly talk about this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in. It's a complicated world right now. And this complication is not going away anytime soon. I know for myself and those in my circle, we've been engaged in self-reflection, conversations, and in very small ways coming to terms with the injustices, crises, and changes that surround us all. COVID-19 is still happening. Calgary is, for whatever reason, sort of turning into the Florida of hotspots, unfortunately. Climate change is happening. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is happening. Truth and reconciliation is happening, and Black Lives Matters is happening. But an awakening is also happening. And as we as a collective group work towards this better tomorrow, I encourage us all to reflect upon finding our places in that tomorrow that we're hoping to create. And let's be focused on our actions and on our impacts and consequences, and just keep an eye on what we're trying to ultimately achieve, which is a better world for everybody. So this is not a time for the individual. Rather, this is a time for the many, and this is a time for movements. So let's go ahead and create a basic income movement. Now, with that out of the way, one last thing before we get on to the show, and I'll actually stop talking. Expectations of chat conduct. We haven't had any issues in our previous webinar sessions, but let's just be kind. Let's look out for one another. We do have some moderators in case things are required on that end, but let's just be kind today. Let's ask great questions, and let's really take this as an opportunity to interact, engage, and learn. So with that, our agenda for today, we're just finishing up the welcome. We have our panelist presentations. We have a call to action. We'll then have our panelist Q&A, and then we'll be closing down our webinar. So let's get on with the show, shall we? So I'd like to introduce our very first speaker. Zeynep Verjee is the laureate of the 2020 Governor General's Visual and Media Arts for Outstanding Contribution. An artist, critic, a writer with expertise in cultural policy and cultural diplomacy. Over 4 decades, she has contributed to international legislations and national policies pertaining to the culture sector. She continues to work on issues of artist labor, racial equity, cultural planning, cultural institutions, cultural diplomacy, and culture trade. Currently, she's the executive director of the Ontario Association of Art Galleries in Toronto, where she is spearheading the move to integrate the public art gallery sector into the digital ecosystem. Please do join me in welcoming Zeynep to your screens. Zeynep.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all having a good day. I really want to thank our co-hosts, the Ontario Basic Income Network and the Calgary Basic Income, for this opportunity really to speak today and to share our story. And really the point is to make the case for basic income for the arts. So on today's webinar, I'm here together with my co-authors, Craig Bergold and Clayton Windat, wonderful people, to share these stories behind our call to action. The 3 of us are engaged in this endeavor with deep respect, and we've come together in solidarity to address the issues of artist labor and income. So how did I get to this point? What is the history of my arrival to this moment? Next. So I was born during the Calabar in East Africa. This was a time of heavy racial segregation. And it was this sort of lived experience that has been a driver for me in breaking down, systemic discrimination, denial, lack of access. And it's really led me to initiate and participate and extend solidarity to numerous movements and alliances, which at their core have really been calling for a better tomorrow. You can see on this slide some of the things that I've worked on. There have been many interventions, associations, calls to action, all kinds of work towards trying to change systemic barriers of all kinds. And a lot of my work has also been grounded in gender and race and identity and work at their intersections. And so I'll just mention a couple of them here today. I worked with Sarah Diamond, who established the BC Women's Labour History Project. And this was an amazing, solid work that was done, which documented the histories of women who were active in the trade union movement in British Columbia since the 1890s. And, as the war began, women's labor really became kind of central importance in sustaining the war effort, filling newly created industrial service and government jobs. And then when women moved into industry during the massive organizing drive by the labor movement, they were also post-war, they were pushed out of that labor force and back into their homes or into female job ghettos of service and office work. So, they were kind of moved in and moved out when they were needed. And this was recorded by Sarah Diamond's project. The image that you're seeing on the slide today is from a poster from Invisible Colors. And this was an international film and video festival. And it was really about organizing women of color, film and video makers, to fight for equal access to the means of production and distribution. And I was a co-founder on this event, and this happened in 1989, very much in support of women of color creators. Next slide, I want to talk about the status of the artist. Now, I really feel this is important for me to talk about this today. During the COVID-19 crisis, I've been writing on issues that matter to the arts, and especially from the policy and sort of systemic perspective. On May 15th, I wrote on a 50-year-old issue in the Georgia Straight on the status of the artist. It was really, the status of the artist came out of a UNESCO declaration made in 1980, and Canada is a signatory on it. And it really wants to address the social and economic status of the artist, primarily the centrality of artists in society, and two, the atypical nature of work, and hence the issue of income associated with it. And these are sort of the core tenets of the status of the artist, which informs the governance of any legislation pertaining to artist labor and income. But you can see from the slide also, what this is about. And I want to go to the next slide because I want to talk a little bit about what is the state of artists today. Today the world of labor actually looks a lot like the way art labor has looked for decades. In fact, do you know that artists earn 43% less than the general labor? This is why we're making this case. The Status of the Artist Declaration has asked the signatory governments to offer artists equal status and footing with other professionals in the labor market. In Canada, artists have actually experienced similar exclusions as farm workers, as migrant workers, as domestic workers in the labor law. They've been excluded, similar exclusions. And so our call to action is really to build on the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB as we know it, towards a systemic solution through basic income. And this urgency of this matter, of course, is not lost on artists. Many artists and cultural workers have really, in the last few weeks, have come to me to share their stories. They've trusted me with their personal stories of acute poverty, of homelessness, of hunger, their panhandling, mental health issues, and really all of this is about the loss of their dignity as human beings. And this really moved me, and this is what's made me come to this call for action and get really behind this. So I want to share with you one story from Ryan Larkin, a Canadian animator, an artist and a sculptor, and he was described as the Frank Zappa of animation films. Ryan lived with every artist's worst nightmare of downward spiraling and panhandling on the streets to make ends meet. I want to share today some excerpts from a 2004 Oscar-winning film called Ryan. It was an animated short made by this other artist, animator called Chris Landreth. And you can see the full version, which is about 13 minutes long, of the National Film Board website. But right now I want to share just a couple of minutes with you.
So I said, what I really want to do is make a film just with figures, walking figures. Oh wow, you got some. Oh wow, you got one of the original drawings.
Ryan's looking at artwork he created 35 years ago. This is the first time he's seen this drawing since he created it.
This is amazing. Oh wow, this is beautiful.
35 years ago, Ryan created thousands of drawings like this one, and then put them together one after the other after the other.
I meet people that say that my films had influenced a whole generation of animation filmmakers, which is probably true. It was fabulous. It was a great honor to be nominated. But then everybody gets nominated for Academy Award eventually.
I want to see you thrive.
What? Who's going to buy my creations? What's in it for me? I don't create because I've been ripped off so fucking much, I decided to stop creating. Creativity, what do you think I can do, you know? I cannot do anything. I've been deprived. Deprivation is the most devastating thing. I will surely, you know, be right on deck. I'll give up booze and give up cigarettes and right on deck. If somebody gives me some fucking money, one cannot do anything, anything at all, without the power of money. I got like about, you know, $10 in my pocket, which is to me like a really happy experience. But to most people, they spend $10 every 15 minutes. I can't believe it, man. For them to steal anymore, if I present myself as being just a jerk on the street. But I'm still acquiring and enjoying human behavior and putting it back into my work. Bonsoir, merci. Spare change? No? Okay, merci. Gentlemen, can spare a little change? Hey, thanks, man. Merci bien. Monsieur, can spare a little change? Give us spare change, sir. Thank you, sir. Spare change, sir. Spare change. Thank you, sir. Spare change. Give us spare change, sir. Spare change, sir. Thank you, sir. You're very kind.
So I just really wanted to end on this one and just say, when art is life, all life is work. So the little clip that you saw on Ryan, those early animations themselves actually went to the Oscars way back in 1968. And during the making of this work, after the sort of increased attention on Ryan, he was invited back to the National Film Board to work on a film. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2007. The film was titled Spare Change, and it was released by the NFB in 2008. So for any artist, their work and practice is always lifelong. And it's a life of emotional labor, it's decommodified, and it's atypical. And through this call, we are trying to draw attention, all of us together, to the urgent issues of artist labor and income. And I'm going to leave it there. And I welcome any questions that you may have later. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen today.
Thank you very much, Zainab. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Pierre-Luc Landry. And before joining the Department of French at UVic, Pierre taught at multiple other organizations, including the Royal Military College of Canada. His research focuses on contemporary literature of various geographical areas, mostly Quebec, Canada, and France, and on Indigenous literature written in French. He specializes in research creation, which he understands as an undisciplined methodology, and on queer theories and cultural studies. He is a writer, a publisher, and a queer activist. Please welcome to your screen, Pierre-Luc.
Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, Matt. I've been asked today to shortly present the situation in Quebec and the Francophone communities across Canada. So that's what I'll try to do. And today I have a special hat on my head, which is one of the members of the board of directors from the Union des écrivaines et écrivains québécois, the Union of Quebec Writers. We can go on the next slide, please. The public letter that has been co-written by Zainab and Clayton and Craig, amongst other, has been translated in French. So if you know of people or organizations who still haven't endorsed that letter, it's still possible to do so. Here you have a short list of all the federations and associations and councils that have publicly signed and publicized that that letter for a basic income for artists and everyone, including the Union of Quebec Writers that I represent today. It hasn't made a lot of noise in the public discourse yet. It still hasn't reached the mainstream, and for that there is a reason that I will explain on the next slide. So as you know, the Me Too movement comes and goes in waves. And right now in Quebec, particularly in the cultural sector, there is a giant wave on online anonymous sexual assaults accusations and denunciations. So it's hitting very hard on the cultural sector, very hard, but rightfully hard on the cultural sector, including the publishing houses, the music distributors and producers, concert venues, the humor comedy network and everything. And it has delayed advocacy for basic income, not because the associations that signed the letters are not working on different projects at the same time and advocating for different things at the same time, but you know as well as I do that our media have a attention span that is very limited. And so right now this is what's in the news mostly, and the image that you can see on this slide is taken from CTV News during one of the demonstration in Montreal last week. So it hasn't reached so much the mainstream, but it doesn't mean that it's not present and that basic income is not important for the associations, notably the Union of Quebec Writers that I represent. So I will show you on the next slides some things that have happened in that field. So there has been a collective letter that has been written last September and October by 236 individuals that decided to work on a Google Doc collaboratively and collegially against to communicate the fatigue and the stress that the free labor that is required from writers and artists of other arts is putting on the individuals. So it was mostly at the beginning a new generation of writers, so people in their 20s and 30s, and but it reached some momentum and then it crossed the generations. And it was endorsed by the union that I represent today. If you're interested in reading that letter, it's only in French, but it's a very interesting text. It's around 5 pages, and it addresses a lot of concerns in an intersectional lens. So we talk about racism, about homophobia, about marginalization, and why all of these things are heavy on the shoulders of artists who are almost required to provide free labor in the public discourse and in the cultural institutions. So as I said, up to last week, there was 236 individuals signatures, but the letter is available online. The link will be shared in the chat. And later on with the follow-up email, you can read it, translate it if you want, and sign it too. And that has been endorsed by the union as part of the different actions that we're taking to advocate for a better remuneration and payment of artists. Also, we have been dealing with governments. I'll show you on the next slide the situation that is particular to Quebec. So as Zainab said earlier, it's federal and provincial. The laws are divided between the two levels of government. There is a major project that the union is working right now. It's the revision of the law on the status of the artist. There are 2 laws that have been adopted in Quebec in 1987 and 1988. The first one, you have the exact title of the law, but it suffices to say that it concerns stage artists, musical artists, and cinema artists. And the second law engaged visual artists, craftsmen, crafts artists, and literature. And the first law is binding. That means that the association that represents stage artists, musical artists, and film artists have a power of negotiation with the producers and distributors. So if you want to work on a TV show set, you have to be a member of the association that's pertaining to your career, and that association has a contract that they sign with the producers and the distributors, and it protects you, and it sets a list of salaries, let's say it like that. But for visual artists, crafts artists, and literature artists, the law is not binding. So the associations do not have that power of negotiation. So UNEC, the union that I represent, we have a contract that we offer on our website, but it is not binding by law. So we're lobbying with the government to change that so that it becomes binding, and that every writer before publishing a book can benefit from the lawyers and the professionals at the union and the contracts to get a better salary, remuneration, fees, honoraria, etc. So that is the main major project right now, because when the government changed a couple of years ago, they were open to negotiations. They wanted to review that law, and it's still working. So right now we're doing a lot of lobbying with the provincial government. But there's also lobbying happening with the federal government, and a lot of different associations came together to show the general public what a life without arts would look like. So that is a very interesting campaign that you can visit on the website. The website is bilingual this time, so you can read the manifesto and see the different advertisement that were produced. It was for TV, for YouTube, etc. And it shows exactly what it would look like if there was no art. So that is an extremely interesting visual representation of the importance of the artist in general life for everyone. So you have here on that slide the different logos of the different associations that came together. They're mostly from Quebec, but some of them are pan-Canadian too, and they represent more than 200,000 artists, and there is more than 11,000 individual signatures on the website. So that is something that we can add to the call for actions on top of basic income for the arts. Because as Zainab said before me, COVID-19 has revealed a lot of the hypocrisy in our networks and in our milieu and everything. So I encourage every one of you to visit these different initiatives and partake in them and disseminate them, not dissimulate, that's absolutely not the same thing, but disseminate them so that it becomes mainstream in the discourse, which hasn't done yet. So that's mostly what I would like and what I hope for today.
Pierre-Luc, thank you so much for your presentation and sharing your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next guest I would like to introduce is Patty Pon. Calgary Arts Development President and CEO, Patty Pon is a veteran community and arts champion with an extensive track record of leadership and service here in Calgary. Patty has deep and diverse experience in the arts sector, having served as Vice President of Administration at Arts Commons here in Calgary, with stints at Alberta Performing Arts Stabilization Fund and Alberta Theatre Projects. In the community, she serves on the board of the Calgary Foundation and on a committee for the Calgary Stampede. She was a founding member of the Asian Heritage Foundation in Southern Alberta and served on the steering committee for Imagine Calgary, as well as on the board for CKUA Radio Network. Patty has been awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, as well as the 2013 Harry and Martha Cohen Award, recognizing significant contribution to Calgary's theatre community. And when not working feverishly as an arts champion, Patty has been known to sip on a bubble tea and ponder where her next travel adventure will take her. So please, everybody, do join me in welcoming Patty to your screens. Patty.
Hi, and thank you very much, Matt, for that introduction. I'm just so happy and thrilled to be here with all of you. And Yes, bubble tea is my vice. So there you go. I'm just going to take a bit of time to actually share a story with you of something that Calgary Arts Development tried. In our organization, we favor a phrase called small experiments with radical intent. And so the story I want to share with you right now is one of those experiments in 2019 called the Individual Artist Program. Now, briefly, for those of you who don't know Calgary Arts Development, there's a link in the chat. You can go to our website. Primarily, over 80% of our funds go directly out in the form of grant investments into the hands of artists and arts organizations. That's what we do primarily. But moreover, we also have another component of our work, which is called arts development work. And it covers a variety of areas, but most importantly, it is about doing our best to give artists voice, whether it's through arts-led city building, through building capacity among ourselves and within the sector. And so it's in that context that I share with you our story of the 2019 Individual Artist Grant Investment Program. You know, as many of you who may have received grants over the years, we have the traditional organizational grant programs and the individual artist grant programs. And in, I guess it was maybe 2017 or 18, we came pretty late to the game around individual artist investment. We only started making grant investments to individual artists in 2012. So in preparation for 2019, we asked ourselves the question, what would happen if rather than investing in a project that an individual artist wanted to undertake, that we actually invested in their practice? And, you know, any of you who are artists, I know you have dozens of projects in your head, in your heart, on the go at any time. And we wanted to acknowledge that. And so in 2019, our small experiment with radical intent was to create 10 artist grant investments of $30,000 to 10 artists who did indeed have projects in mind, but we wanted to give them the kind of space to explore, right? Again, I don't really know of any artist who ever works on one project at a time. There's always a bunch on the go, and we wanted to acknowledge that. And so, so we assessed the program. We made grant investments to 10 artists. Maybe what I'll indicate right now is that we have a link on our website to our 2019 accountability report. So that's our annual report that reports on all of our programs. And in particular, starting on page 40, we actually specifically speak to our individual we did actually have a project grant, and then we had the arts grant programs. And so they're all featured on our website and in that report. And the link will be there for you. So you can read about the artists, you can read about what happened. Now, we were inspired by the Artist Trust program administered by the Edmonton Arts Council. They've been actually undertaking a $35,000 grant investment program to one artist every year for several years. And so we took that as our inspiration and we invested in these 10 artists. And needless to say, the work that these artists created was spectacular, and it ran the gamut of cross disciplines, specific disciplines, new collaborations, anything you can imagine these artists, these 10 artists undertook. But here's the but. The but happened when COVID-19 happened. So while we describe some of the projects that these artists were able to undertake, what we have not yet done with our small experiment is actually evaluate it, is actually surround it with all the research-based evidence that we know came from these extraordinary artists. When you see their names, many of them you will have heard of before or seen before. And as I see it in my community here in Calgary, we saw a just kind of acceleration and elevation of the work of these artists. Many of them were leaders in their community before, but even for those who were at the early or heading into mid-career, we saw just that extra jump up. And that's what we were hoping to see. If you hear me talk at all in Calgary, I always talk about arts-led city building. Artists will be the ones who help point us to the future possibilities. Artists are who will tell us our stories of this time in particular. And so I guess I lead into where I see this going. As I said, COVID-19 happened. Our opportunity to continue the program into 2020 was halted for a couple of reasons. One is, if you look at our report, you'll see that in the individual grant project program, we had 173 applications granting $530,000, but we had a request of $2.5 million. We were only able to grant to 34 artists. And again, our preference is not to piecemeal a grant. We want to support the project as much as possible in its entirety. And so we saw the need on that project side, and we were trying to balance it against the individual artist program. And in 2020, we chose to move towards the project grant program and then subsequently emergency funds for COVID-19 and have the artist project grant on hold. I have about a minute left, I think, Matt, and I'll just finish up by saying, as you've heard me say, I believe with all my heart and soul that artists are going to lead the way. And during this pandemic, we have seen citizens lean on the arts in so many ways for free. That's why we have public support of the arts, so that Canadians can access the voice and the expression and the heart of artists anytime, irrespective of what your financial circumstance may be. And I talk about how the arts should be for all citizens, not some citizens. Well, that includes artists. And we should not be relying on the future and on realizing possibilities on the backs of artists. And that's why I felt so strongly about being a part of this panel, and why I commend all of you who are undertaking this work. Please sign the support. Government will hear us when thousands of voices are speaking. Thank you so much, and I look forward to this discussion later.
Patty, thank you very much for that. Very much appreciate your participation. Our next guest, I'd like to introduce JD. JD is an established multidisciplinary designer and theater artist, producer, inclusive educator, mad activist, and innovator. She specializes in the design of playful and participatory experiences in theater, movement, new media, and events that push forward ideas of diversity, belonging, civic engagement, and practical applications of theory. She recently co-created community engagement projects, including the Citizens Monument Project with the City of Vancouver, All In, Designing the Future of Inclusive Practices with the Conference Board of America, Me on the Map with YPT in Toronto, just to name a few. JD is an award-winning Canadian playwright and a critically acclaimed performer with works produced across the country. She's the co-founder of POD, a citizen designer lab, and she's the artistic director of Nervous System, a performance company in Vancouver. Please welcome JD to your screens. JD.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We're good to go.
Great.
We're good to go.
You can, great. Thank you everyone who's spoken so far. Thank you everyone who's participating. Thank you for all the work that goes into these new ways of gathering. I just wanted to acknowledge the Basic Income YYC project that I am sort of helping to steer, but really is an initiative that came about because of emergency funding through CADA. I would also like to acknowledge that I am essentially on basic income with CADA. I'm called a inclusive designer in residence, but that income where I help to move forward equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility work does allow me to volunteer and give my experience to other places. So I don't even know if Patty knows this, but that's how I got to help out with Basic Income YYC. So there you go. It's on your dime. Thank you. Basic Income YYC came about because there was emergency funding available during because of COVID-19. And we realized that the artists on the margins were not going to hear about this funding, we're not going to know about it. So I contacted Colleen Houston at Disability Action Hall. And we decided to put a collective together around basic income because we wanted to get emergency funding to disability artists with disabilities, because the government was not going to top up any disability benefit in Alberta. What we ended up with was going to arts organizations and disability organizations and asking them to nominate 2 artists that they knew who identified with disabilities, because we only had money for 10 people. We got way more than 10 nominations. These people came together over webinars with Sky Lewis, a local printmaker in Calgary, and have been designing posters for basic income and reasons why. They're just finishing the second phase. They will have individual works, and then Sky Lewis will take this, put it sort of into use it as inspiration for an old style poster, and those posters will be available to download and get up everywhere. I just wanted to speak to disability arts and the idea of basic income. You know, when we design for the margins, we design for everybody, and basic income is just a matter of dignity. And when you see these 10 artists gathered together and the conversations that we get to have and the community that they've already formed, we understand that that money created community, brought together people from the Women's Center, Disability Action Hall. I am actually having a bit of a bad brain day myself, so I can't actually recall all the places. But I will tell you that, you know, my experience as being an artist is, you know, what we are seeing in the world is a failure of the imagination. Those of us who live under the poverty line, or those of us who are precarious workers in the arts, we know that going in. We just can't think of doing anything else, honestly. But what we get is we get to live our lives with the value of curiosity. And art is meant to be a gift. And so every time we talk about the arts sector, I would encourage us all on this call to never say it without artists. We never say it without the people that are inside it. Because right now, what we're seeing a lot of funding go towards is protecting buildings and administrative, high-paid administrative positions, none of which can exist without artists making work. I was profoundly moved by the video that was shared. I know Ryan's story. I can tell you that with artists with disabilities, there's no expectation that you're ever going to get any money for it. So you just keep making, because that's all you can do. What basic income for artists will give us is an entire world that doesn't think an imagination is something to be commodified, because it is not. Some of the saddest conversations I ever have are when people don't think of themselves as creative or artistic. The greatest divide is that artists are not citizens. So, you know, CERB is what we're witnessing is when we're witnessing a moment where they said this could never happen. So let's keep on working, join together. It does take a movement. The last thing I wanted to say is I just wanted us to take a moment, take a breath in, think about something that you're missing, that you used to take for granted, that an artist made. Just send it out there to them to be all right. So thank you for my basic income, Patty. The other thing that I'm doing with it, besides, I hope, helping CADA, is we have started an initiative here in BC called Mad Lifeguards. And it's basically an old-fashioned phone tree where people who have experienced violence with mental health issues are doing wellness checks for each other. That's the kind of thing that happens underground all the time with artists. So thanks everyone. Thanks for all the work you do.
JD, thank you very much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate that. The first thing that popped into my head as a Calgarian was the giant blue ring. I love the, well, it's divisive, but I love the Twitter account that's associated with the giant blue ring here in Calgary. Anyway, all right, let's, hopefully I'm crossing, stop it, crossing my fingers. We've got all of our technical difficulties sorted out. And now that I've, stop it. Now that I've said shut out, of course, it's now all continuing to happen. What I would like to do is to introduce Clayton Windat. Our next speaker. Clayton is a Métis non-binary multi-artist living and working between Sturgeon Falls and Toronto, Ontario. Clayton holds a BA in Fine Arts from Nipissing University and received graphic design certification from Canadore College. With an extensive history of working in artist-run culture and community arts, and through their own activism, Clayton works towards healthier relationships for national and global Indigenous artists and communities. The former executive director of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective, Clayton is an active filmmaker and director, and with works featured in festivals such as the Imagine Native and the Toronto International Film Festival. Clayton works in and with community design, communications, curation, performance theater, technology, and consulting, and is a very active writer, filmmaker, and visual media artist, and was recently appointed to the National Gallery of Canada's Board of Trustees. So could everyone please join me in welcoming Clayton. Clayton.
Hi, everybody. How's it all going today? Thanks for giving me a platform to speak, and thanks for letting me talk a little bit about myself, which is hilarious because that's probably what's going to happen. And I'll just talk directly to you, Matt, as we go along to have you kind of move slides. But it's funny, I know we're talking about the universal basic income and its importance, and that is why I feel the need of sharing from a personal place. It kind of comes from that point of where, you know, Craig and Zainab and I worked on this letter that, you know, I think was initiated through just so many things intersecting at the same time, and you know, you get asked to get involved in something, and it matters to you personally, so you say yes, and then you're asked to present, and you're like, well, now you get to find out why it's personal to me, but also as a way of me being accountable to why I've done this work, and accountable to you, the people that are here to hear more. So if you want to just go through the slides, there's not a lot of content in here, but it's like, so I'm an activist. I've been working with within the arts sector for a little under 20 years. And a lot of that work has revolved around major message making and the idea of how to build consensus on an issue, how to understand our environment, and how to try to go about making change. And whether that is from a cultural perspective, whether it's about a local issue that needs national input or national change, whether it's about the things that affect me as an individual, these are all factors that come through things. And as I'm making those messages, what ends up taking place is that the world that's impacting me the most ends up being where I'm responding the most. So next slide. As you can see, I like taking pictures and using myself in those pictures as a way of trying to provoke questions. You can also see the significant weight gain that I've put on over the years in comparison to some of these pictures now that I'm looking at them. Sorry. But there's that, this also comes from a practice where I was asked to be a columnist for a local paper to educate on the arts, and quickly learned that without a photo to go along with my text, I would have almost no one responding to things. And as a columnist, very often you may be writing about something that hasn't happened yet, or you're trying to educate on an issue, and there is no image to go with things. So I started making images, even if it was just me holding a sign saying something, it would get more attention for what I was trying to say and get more writing. Could you go ahead, Matt? So this is just a couple of film pieces of me doing things and pushing boundaries. There's a clip on the side there from an NFB piece that I did, and up on top, that's another piece I did for IFCO in Ottawa. And the one on the far side here is actually me holding the ice on Lake Nipissing and going under with a camera, which is awesome. It was a terrifying experience. Anyway, keep going. All right, so I'm gonna read this. And I told myself that I would just read it, so I'm gonna do it. As a contemporary multi-artist, curator, and designer, my practice takes on many forms, often not overly commercial in nature. This is not that I do not have expenses that come with life, but my art's focus is always on my message, and that the medium becomes a vehicle for that message to be delivered. This makes my art's objects the byproducts of delivering my messages, and as my mediums are often not commercially viable, I often do not engage the commercial art world. So basically, I don't make any money off of my art, or at least not often. An additional constraint is that I am not a perfectionist anyway, and that is absolutely true. My art functions as a broadcast point for challenging ideas and making change within communities and governments. I support critical discourse as a mode of civic engagement within a healthier society, amplifying voices that challenge in order to better understand each other. So the idea being that we could all somehow figure out a way to work things out in Canada, maybe that opportunity is here. I also wanted to read this because it really makes everyone realize that to me, my involvement in this campaign and working in advocacy is a form of my arts practice. Like, I cannot take myself out of the work I'm doing, and I cannot prevent bringing myself into what I'm doing. So no matter where I go, no matter what I'm doing, I'm still me. I'm only speaking with my own voice. And a large part of the work that Zainab and Craig have been doing is building consensus so that the letter is never going to be perfect. It's never going to make everyone happy, but it is a consensus of voices. Next slide. So I decided to just show some work in general. Craig did a presentation within the arts sector where there were poets and we were having these deep, heated conversations about things, and all of a sudden there's art presented. And I thought that's just so valuable. And when I saw that Zainab was going to present clips from the short Ryan, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to present some of my work and see how that goes. Plus, I don't know if I can fill 10 minutes. Go ahead. So lately, that was a clip from a work that I created this month. It's called I Live Under, and it's part of a series that's part of the Finding Track Zero series of work that I've been doing, where I'm making a series of short art films. Some of them include animations, some of them are found footage of my family going back as much as 10 years, because as an artist, I am working all the time, trying to make projects all the time, but often don't have the time and space to really activate reflection. And I think that being in an isolation situation, aside from crisis, which has to hold space, isolation has allowed me a lot of time to work alone. So that work that was just shown the audio is entirely me recording by myself. The rotoscoping technique is me recording myself and then hand drawing over top of it. And the fire that is in the background is in my backyard and shot over my birthday last year. So so far I've made about 20 of these pieces over the last few months, and it's probably the most productive independent work I've ever done. And at the same time, it's in a time period where you almost feel ashamed for being productive because there are so many people struggling with so much. If you want to go through another slide, Matt. My practice often deals with going out in the public to engage things. I have a very heavily community involved process. And so going back to the time period we're in right now and how I'm working independently, it makes me think about CERB and how much that has meant to me. So I grew up in a house that where my father was on disability. When I was on my own, I've been on, social assistance, which I call welfare. I was on employment insurance at one point. I lived in a geared to income apartment. And so basically grew up and existed within a lot of places where there's a lot of monitoring on your life, a lot of financial monitoring and encouragement to get a job, but also the recourse of when you make money, they take money away. And this is that kind of balance of monitoring on an ongoing basis, like, oh, you got a part-time job. Oh, cool. Well, now we're going to cut your check in half. And I'm like, so, this, or having to go out and in a small town, deliver a minimum of 50 resumes and get signatures by 50 businesses when there's only 35 businesses. And if you have to do that every month, those 35 businesses are really sick of seeing you after the first couple times. So just that kind of, I know that that's not really a standard practice anymore, and the internet has opened up a lot of doors, but the monitoring has really bothered me. And CERB has been such a hands-off process. I really enjoy not only the financial support and what it has allowed me to do as an artist, but I can be accountable. I can go and take this money, live my life, take care of my children, pay my bills. And if I make more money at the end of the year, if they say, oh, you made too much, you have to pay some back, I'll be accountable in that way and I'll pay that back. And I think that hands-off approach is part of what I get excited about with the possibilities of a universal basic income, is that idea that the safety net is the starting point, not the end of jumping through a million hoops. And that part for me is more important than sort of any of the financial instances. And as I've said multiple times to Craig and Zainab, that for me, the details are going to be left to government to sort out. Right now, I just want to know that the money is going to come in a form. How they determine it comes is on their end, but I want to know that it's going to happen. And then a lot of people have said, don't allow this to replace existing structures. And any structure that was set out as a financial support for people in need also have a mandate of what they do with that money besides the survival part. So any organization that is supposed to be helping people with employment or helping people to educate themselves or live a higher standard of life, those systems are still there. It just doesn't have the money dangled at the end of the stick as the reason. And Matt, feel free to flow through. Am I over time yet?
I'm just going to jump in. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Sorry, Clayton.
Go through the rest of the slides. I definitely want to get to the contact info. And we won't do the last video. That was backup. So here's me burning stuff. Here's pictures of performance art. Again, look at how big I am. Oh my gosh. So that's a statement that I made for the Craft Federation at which this slide is adapted from, and it tries to talk about thinking beyond creativity as a starting point. This is me, and if you don't mind, I'll just leave that up for the last 30 seconds. If anyone wants to personal message me to be in touch, have any questions about anything, if anyone wants to go and look further, for accountability purposes alone, I will respond to everybody, but I also just love the idea that you're here and taking the time to learn about a universal basic income. And my last statement will be, as much as this has been a very arts-heavy discussion, we are not talking about the arts. We're talking about the arts playing their part in relation to everyone.
Clayton, thank you very much. Appreciate that. and your flexibility there. Before we jump into our last presenter, I'd like to just share some apologies. Apparently, we're having some technical difficulties with facilitating the ability for individuals to pin our ASL interpreters. We're working on it, but we can ensure you that the post video, so the video of this webinar that we post on YouTube, will feature full ASL for the entire video. So again, we do apologize for that. We are working on that. And I think we're going to be posting that in both French and English in the chat. On to our last guest. I would like to introduce Craig Bergold, a media artist. Craig, he strives to combine social justice activism with a contemporary art practice. His award-winning films like the National Film Board of Canada documentary Pocket Desert, Confessions of a Snake Killer, and Educate Your Attitude, they've been broadcast on television and screened at film festivals, museums, and art galleries around the world. But that's just a small taste of Craig's introduction. I'll leave the rest to Craig himself. So please, everybody, do welcome me in joining Craig to your screens. Craig.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Perfect. I'd like to thank all of the presenters and the technicians for making this webinar such a success. I was asked by Barbara Borax at the Ontario Basic Income Network to volunteer as the team leader for the Case for Basic Income for the Arts. And I have a long history of arts and labor activism, including at the Vancouver's Emily Carr University of Art and Design and at the Ontario College of Art and Design, also at Public Service Alliance of Canada, and co-founder of the Vancouver Mayworks Festival of Working People of the Arts. So when I considered jumpstarting the Basic Income in the Arts campaign, because I've worked with so many unions, I first contacted the large artist unions like the Visual Artists of CARFAC. And after discussions, I drafted the letter and invited my colleagues Zainab and Clayton to collaborate and join as co-authors. And I want to give a shout out to copy editor Scott McLeod at Prefix Magazine, and also the French translator Lawrence Duboc in Montreal. Together, we all polished the letter that was sent to Prime Minister Trudeau in Ottawa on July 16th, calling for a basic income guarantee for all. It's really important to acknowledge all this unpaid labor in a campaign like this. So a shout out to all the individuals who signed the letter, and a big thanks to the organizations representing 75,000 artists, writers, technicians, and performers like IATSE's Stage and Film Crew, the Canadian Federation of Musicians, the Writers Union, Actors Equity, and many more. Also, the tireless lobbying of these groups also pushed Ottawa recently to extend the pandemic's Canada Emergency Response Benefits CERB for an additional 8 weeks. But for many of us who are still underemployed or unemployed, the next few weeks of summer are overshadowed by the looming question, what happens when the CERB benefits are over? And only our collective actions can win us a basic income. I want to share a personal story. Some of us can identify a single event that changed their life. And this happened in 1978 for a Canadian teenager living on the Lower East Side of New York City at a poetry reading, the likes of which he had never heard or seen before. The poet's voice was booming and whispering poetry in motion about Black power with uncompromising tenor, and the words deconstructed systems of oppression with a jazz-like staccato, kind of like a John Coltrane music, but with words. That poet was the late Amiri Baraka. His attitudes and rhythm transfixed me in the moment. And at the end of this set, I rushed the stage to meet this spoken word magician. And I learned that Amiri, also known as Leroy Jones, was also a playwright and co-founder of the 1960s Black Arts Movement. At Amiri's invitation, I joined a new group called the Anti-Imperialist Cultural Union. And Amiri asked me to make a poster for his next upcoming play. So this was my first gig, my first poster for his play called What is the Relationship of the Lone Ranger to the Means of Production? Well, let me tell you what that relationship looks like. One night, the New York City police pulled Amiri out of his car. Accused of a resisting arrest, he was beaten, handcuffed, and stuffed into the back of a police cruiser. The officers took the so-called extra precaution of holding a gun to one of the most respected and most widely published writers of his generation, and they took him to lockdown, all witnessed by his wife and young children. The community sprung into action, fueled in small part by these silkscreen posters made by myself and Chrissa Gibson. Long before social media, this analog action plastered on street corners and any wall that would fit a poster. That's how we used to get the message out. Amiri was held in custody for the weekend and released just in time to attend the reception at the White House in honor of American poets. For me, hearing Baraka's poem the first time was a portal, an entranceway to learn about the acts of solidarity and the power of art. The demand for income security, a guaranteed income, a basic income, is indivisible for me from anti-racism work, gender equality, anti-poverty, and dignity for all. Today, Amiri Baraka's son, Raz Baraka, is the mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Newark is one of 11 US cities considering a basic income, including Stockton, California. This is the Dr. King UBI mural in Stockton. It's called Seed. This year, Mayor Raz Baraka wrote a letter about guaranteed income. He says, in 1967, the National Welfare Rights Organization, a coalition of thousands of welfare recipients led by Black women across the country with an active presence in Newark, demanded decent income as a right and emphasized the disproportionate burden of unpaid care work on low-income women. Likewise, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Panthers both advocated for a guaranteed income. This photo from the 1968 Poor People's March, led by Martin Luther King, you can see the picket signs for a guaranteed annual income and full employment. These campaigns were indivisible. A precursor to the global basic income movement is the 1972 International Wages for Housework campaign, where social feminists raised questions about a social wage and a social benefit untethered from the fetish of wage work. These feminists asserted that unpaid, reproductive, domestic, and emotional labor exceeds traditional notions of who is the worker and where is the workplace. This group also was interested in reparations for slavery. In the 1980s, the Artists Union of Ontario called for a living culture and a living wage. In the photo on the left at the Toronto Labor Day Parade, the banner says, guaranteed annual income. So we have a long history of guaranteed annual income. In 2001, 5,000 precarious workers held the first Euro May Day in Milan, Italy, and 3 years later in Barcelona and Milan, over 100,000 demonstrators filled the streets calling on a basic income. And you can see at the bottom of the blue poster, the call for basic income. A defining aspect of the Euro May Day is the creation of culture jamming visual icons such as San Precario, patron saint of the precarious. And during the glitzy Milan Fashion Week, the poster on the right, migrant women workers creatively crashed the catwalks calling for a basic income and highlighting the precarious dark side of the fashion industry. Here at home, in 2008, the Basic Income Canada Network was co-founded by Sheila Regier with anti-poverty activists and health professionals. In 2018, the short-lived Ontario Basic Income pilot project was canceled in all 4 cities, Hamilton, Thunder Bay, Lindsay, and Brantford. And Jessie Gollum, a pilot participant herself, used her camera to amplify how basic income changed people's lives for the better. And the sign says, "Basic income helps me stay healthy with good food. I'm ill." Last month, the UK trip-hop band Massive Attack released a video featuring Guy Standing, co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network. I'm just going to play a 30-second clip.
Today, a tiny, obscenely wealthy plutocracy and a well-padded salariat confront a growing precariat, consisting of millions of people with bits and pieces lives, stagnant and uncertain, fluctuating earnings, and living on the edge of unsustainable debt.
So that was the UK trip-hop band Massive Attack, and we asked for permission to use that clip. So the basic income guarantee that the letter wants and refers to is a basic income that's regardless of work status, and like Clayton was talking about, not means tested, and built on existing programs like CERB and childcare benefits and old age security. Our public letter campaign received national and international media attention, online news, social media and radio interviews, and was also mentioned in the House of Parliament's question period. Let's keep the conversation growing. Join us for the basic income marches and events this fall. We hope our efforts will inspire many more to join. Thank you. You can follow me at Precarious Angels and hashtag Artists for Basic Income, and that's a drawing done by my 10-year-old daughter. I talked so much about Precarious Angels, she decided to illustrate it for me. Thank you.
Craig, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And it's so nice that Massive Attack was able to allow us to show that video. I really encourage people to take a look at that video. It's pretty moving. Well, we're running a little bit behind today, of course. So what I would like to do is I would like to bring on our call to action, and then we're going to jump into the Q&A. Our call to action, I would like to introduce Devyani Saltzman. Devyani is a writer, curator, and journalist. She is a former director at Alberta's Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. And in 2018, she was appointed Director of Public Programming for the Art Gallery of Ontario and Toronto. Devyani, welcome to Screens Nationwide. I hope we still have Devyani.
Thank you, Matt. I think I was muted. Do you have me? Hi. Nice to be here, and I know we're running a little late, so I'm going to be reading through some practical calls to action. But before I do, I really just want to thank everyone for sharing their stories. Zainab, Pierre-Luc, Clayton, JD, Patty, and Craig, and from Matt and the team for facilitating this important conversation. So we've been hearing many stories about why basic income should be adopted by our government. We've heard very real situations and lived experience. The letter that was addressed to the Prime Minister has gained national and international traction, as Craig has noted. We have a strong voice and we can be heard. There are some more specific actions we can take collectively. So I'm going to list them. There are 3. Before I do, I also just want to note and give a little bit of context. The case for basic income from the arts is important not just on its own, but because it's part of a much larger collective action. The Ontario Basic Income Network has been organizing by sectors and communities. The case for basic income for work already came out with a report, a case for women, a case for LGBTQ+, food insecurity, health, and criminal justice are all in the works. Together, these cases collectively tell our government the time has come to adopt a basic income, and our voice as the art sector is a huge part of that. So if we can go to slide 1. The first thing you can do, I'm just going to make sure that's up, is for Friday, September 18th, take a photo that shows your support for basic income with a poster or sign and use the hashtag count on basic income. If you can see, it looks like we have a Tigger doing it in this photo. You probably saw in the Canadian Art article, a number of people have already been doing this as as a form of action. And please post it on social media and get all your supporters to as well. For more information, there will be a link posted in the chat to reference. We can go to slide 2, great. Organize or take part in a basic income march on Saturday, September 19th. Marches are planned in many cities, including Toronto at Queen's Park. And for more information, we're going to post a link to basic income marches, and please use the hashtag basic income march. And thirdly, there are more events taking place across Canada during the 13th International Basic Income Week, September 14th to 20th. You can also organize your own. For more information, check out the link, Basic Income Week, which we will also post in the chat. There's one more project before we head into the Q&A that I'd like to highlight. It's very important that we write letters to our MPs, as well as to as many other MPs in addition to our local MP. For a basic income to be adopted, our elected officials need to hear we want one. They need to know that there is support and votes behind this movement. Coalition Canada, a coalition of basic income advocates across the country, have come together to hold a basic income lobby week for our federal politicians during the week of October 20th. So the marches and the social campaigns are all leading up to this lobby week. We have MP sponsors and advisors from every party. As a really important run up to this week, please make sure you draft letters to your MPs, and the lobby day draft, there are drafts of this you can use as a reference, and I think we are going to put that in the chat now. So the lobby day team drafts the emails and asks we personalize the letter, make it relevant, and send it out. All the instructions are in www.obin.ca/lobby_day, if we can add that to the chat. Please send these letters to as many people as you can, as many MPs as you can. The more our voice can be heard, the better the chance we have of making a real impact during lobby week. The arts voice is a loud one. You've heard it here today through personal testimonials and through advocacy. Let's make sure it's heard for all Canadians, and thank you so much for your time. Over to Matt and the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Devyani. And seeing as, you know, in theory, we were supposed to be finishing in about 12 minutes, but this was a great opportunity for us to engage with our fantastic panelists. Bad Siri. What I would like to do is to, we'll open up the Q&A, and if you do have questions, please go ahead and ask those questions in the Q&A. We'll then just go through our last final bits and pieces to close down for the half hour. But I would ask if some of our panelists have a few more minutes and they'd like to stick around, maybe we can open up the Q&A one more time. And we seem to have some very engaged individuals joining us today. So let's take a quick look at some of the questions that we have. And so this is a general question that we have for all panelists. So panelists, feel free to jump in if you would like. And I'll stop sharing the creative brain here. Is how can we deconstruct classist or elitist arguments against UBI for the arts? So who would like a first stab at that one?
Hi, it's Barb here. Can I jump in?
Yes, so that is the voice of Barbara. She is with the Ontario Basic Income Network. Barbara, go ahead.
That's a great question. Another way we phrase it about deconstructing is looking at the myths that have come up around basic income. And as a number of the panelists have said, the myths around that if you give people money, they won't work. That if you give people money, they won't know how to handle it appropriately. The myths that only waged labor is constructive to society and that artistic or volunteer labor doesn't have a benefit. These are all massive myths that have to be deconstructed. And together with OBIN, with Basic Income Network Canada, with the coalition and many experts across the country, not only have we deconstructed these in reports and presentations, but we continue to. So a really huge focus for the lobby week we're having in Ottawa, and I actually just got off a call with the sponsors, is to deconstruct those myths in front of and with the politicians and parliamentarians who hold those myths? So great question, really, really important point.
I'll just, this is Clayton, I'll just add to that really quickly and say, we've had a lot of conversations about the partisanship, like how this question somehow could be swaying towards one party or another, and how much that isn't the case. That like, I've never been more productive, which is, I feel guilty saying that because I have lost people while this has been happening. But this notion of how many people have been trapped in their homes in isolation and don't want to go get to work. Like, everyone wants to do that. Once the initial impact of having a zero pressure environment fades, people turn to then having an active behavior practice. No one is just going to sleep all day for the rest of their lives. Like, that's just not in human nature. And then the partisan aspect of it, there are so many reasons why this initiative also becomes the jumpstart of an economy as well, where giving the power into people's hands and then watch that return back into those systems through many different ways. So give people the ability to go buy clothes, food, pay their bills, you know, it's going to be good.
I just really want to support what's being said. You know, I agree that we really have to break the myths and the stereotypes about the lazy artist. And artists work across class. I mean, this was, you know, these questions were sort of brought to me during some of the interviews that we did nationally. And, you know, I think that every time somebody says something about the artist, we have to think it's poverty, it's homelessness, it's mental health, it's panhandling. This is the cycle we're trying to break, and that artists are not lazy. And I really feel that this myth completely needs to be busted, because artists work all their lives. Nobody retires from being an artist. It's just that we have to be paid for this work moving forward through basic income. And I think Ryan is a perfect example, you know, that speaks to that truth and beauty. And it's so moving, and I really encourage everyone to take the time to see the full film to really understand what this cycle is.
Thank you all.
I just wanted to add in there too, right? Like in disability arts and artists with disability, a lot of the disability is episodic. And so when we talked about that safety net, you know, we have categories in artists of emerging and senior, you know, but really in disability arts, we're all re-emerging all the time. And what we're seeing right now in the world is that everyone is suffering from an episodic disability, and this may continue. So just this designing for the margin benefits everyone. You know, we all have an episodic disability right now. Thanks.
Barbara, I think perhaps we've got another question in here for you. I believe this came in from when someone registered. Why won't the government just do a basic income? What's the obstacle?
Oh my goodness, $1,000 question. I think earlier, Jan, you noted the phrase, I'll paraphrase, a lack of imagination. But it's more than that. I mean, we're dealing with implementing a basic income is a systemic change, and any systemic change is not easy. Why won't the government implement it? Well, you know, every party, there are people who support it and don't support it. From the very far left, we have arguments why they don't like it. From the very far right, we have arguments why people don't like it. There's financial reasons. How actually based in evidence that financial excuse is, i.e. too expensive, or is it embedded in the Ministry of Finance not wanting to lose control? You know, these are all very relevant issues. The bottom line is so much of it comes down to a misunderstanding of what a basic income is. Again, going back to those myths. And another reason is some people, and this is across all industries and governments, are so entrenched in the current systems, or they have such a deep vested interest in the current systems, they don't want them to change. So the best thing we can do, and everyone on this webinar, like the letter that Craig and Clayton And Zainab wrote, the massive media it got. The best thing is for everyone to raise their voice, to write the letters, to speak to their MPs, to address those myths, to talk about the stories on why you personally will benefit from basic income. And again, on all of our websites, Basic Income Network Canada, OBIN, the coalitions will be up soon, that gives the evidence of why those myths aren't real. So why don't they want it? It's a systemic change. Systemic changes are hard.
So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to ask our artists a very specific question. How can the arts community, or how can individual artists tap into their creativity to help spread this message? Let's throw that out.
I could quickly say something, which is, so like this issue, the basic income isn't new. This isn't like the first time that anyone's talked about it. It's just the first time that Craig, Zainab, and I have written a letter together, or the first time that we've done this webinar. And the answer to how to make the different people in government care is to keep it in the media. So like a few years ago, there was a major initiative for advocacy that took place that didn't really succeed. I'm not going to get into that, but the point being that I had some really great advice from one of the members of provincial parliament in Ontario who said, you're trying so hard to get something on the election docket without working the 4 years leading up to the election. They are never going to change at that point. They're just going to follow what everyone is saying is important. And we as like the population have to make these things important, and then they will come looking to you for answers. So like for me, the artist, broadcast, and not like, oh, you know, Clayton and Zainab and Craig are doing something. I'm like, yeah, we're doing something. What are you doing? Like, you have, you know, signing our letter is great. If you read, you know, whichever basic income network, advocacy-based organization you're connected to, promote them, support them, push them forward, or jump on someone else's or create your own. But the thing is, all that movement keeps the consistent argument in the public view to the point that change has to happen.
I think I would just add in here as well that particularly as public agencies where we steward public dollars, the more we can get funders at the 3 levels, the 3 orders of government to come on side, the better that will be as well. And also as funders, we collect data. And I think it's important for us to be working with entities who are undertaking basic income initiatives to collect that data. Because politicians also like that. They like lots of research. And so I have the capacity to do that. And which is why it's important to me that we do the evaluation on our 2019 program. So that's something. And then for artists who are engaged by arts organizations, we need to get those organizations signing these letters. So speak with them, talk to them, encourage them to sign. It can't just be individual artists. And quite frankly, arts organizations exist for artists. So if we can't get them to sign on, there's another problem that we have here. And so I'll be doing it on my end, but make sure that you as artists do it on yours.
Thank you, Patty. So what I'm going to do is I'd like to just quickly jump into our closing slides, but I would ask that if some panelists are able to stick around, we can jump back in to continue this conversation, but I'm fully aware of everybody's time and I want to be respectful that if folks do need to leave, please don't feel bad. So let me just go ahead and we will say our thanks to, goodness me, to everybody.
That's cool, Matt.
You'd think, thank you. I meant to do that. You know, you'd think that I would know how to operate computers by this point, but I would very much like to thank the Ontario Basic Income Network, Enough for All, Calgary's poverty reduction strategy, and Basic Income Calgary for presenting this. A huge thank you to Calgary Arts Development for being our major sponsor, and as well to the Disability Action Hall as well for sponsoring us. A couple really quick closing actions. When you do leave the webinar, there is going to be a pop-up. It's our feedback survey. We'd really appreciate if you could spend 3 minutes to provide us with some feedback. We also have some links there, how you can take action both if you're in Calgary or in Alberta, as well as in Ontario. And you can also support Basic Income Canada Network at basicincomecanada.org/support. Huge thanks to our panelists, Zainab, Pierre-Luc, Patty, Jan, Clayton, Craig, and Devyani as well. To our ASL interpreters, Deborah and Janice, my hands, they're spasming just looking at the great work that you do. To our captioner, Sandra, as well, thank you so much. And then of course, behind the scenes, we've got Barbara, Brian, Colleen, Dana, Hajir, Jacqueline, Kurt, and Wendy. Thank you all so much for helping us put this on. So with that, we'll officially end, but we do have some extra questions, and feel free to, instead of using the chat section of Zoom, please use the Q&A, and that helps our moderators to curate the questions. So for Craig or Zainab, we've got a question from Bethany. Is there value in combining forces with other industries to lobby for basic income? So for example, could the tourism industry, which relies heavily on artists to quote unquote beautify and help create culturally significant pieces which contribute to tourism? So workers in this industry are often unable to make a living wage. Is there strength in uniting to take on this issue?
You go first, Zainab.
Go ahead. No, go for it.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it's really interesting because the arts has actually been collapsed, right? We've got a sports tourism complex in which art has been collapsed into. But of course, there is huge benefit in solidarity, in combining our forces, in amplifying the message, in pushing really hard. And I know where the pushback comes. It comes in those myths that Barbara addressed, and it also comes in like these quick solution things. You know, government wants to do something really expedient, right? But we know that a homeless shelter hasn't solved homelessness, and we know that a food bank has not taken away hunger. Folks, do not get pushed into any Band-Aid solutions. We have gone beyond it. We need systemic change. We are going to push this so hard and so forward in unity, in solidarity with everyone to make the change. We are not looking for Band-Aid solutions anymore, and break all the myths that you hear about artists and others being lazy. It's just not right.
So the idea of how does the arts work with other communities to bring a basic income. First, I want to talk about how artists have multiple jobs that subsidize their art practice. So in today's economy, in today's world, many people have multiple jobs. They have multiple identities. And I think what the precarious and the idea of the precarious as a new idea is that these multiple identities and work experience all reside in the same person. And so where are the boundaries? Many artists I know, writers, musicians, have other jobs as front-end workers during the COVID. You know, they're either working in health professional, they're working in the service industry. So we're already subsidizing culture, and we are also these other workers that we're talking about. We're not siloed. And so I think what's important is that when we build support as artists, that we really talk about what we share in common with so many other people, because today our identities are very complex. And that complexity is an important thing that we need to acknowledge. When is work real work? Is it only real when you get paid? That's the fundamental question that I think will build solidarity with so many other people, so that when artists talk, they are also talking about their lived experience. And that was mentioned in the Ryan video about homelessness, services that are needed, housing that is needed, all of these other services that are needed. These struggles are all indivisible, and the basic income we want is for all.
I'm just going to jump in here. We have our ASL translators for the 4 minutes. So if I could ask one person to respond to this, and if we could try and keep the answers brief as possible, we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. Melissa K asks, would a companion corporate partnership help encourage the implementation of a UBI? So corporations help fund a UBI on the promise that their contribution will cycle back to pay future employees. Perhaps that goes to Barbara. Perhaps we don't have Barbara anymore.
No, I'm here. There you go. Yeah, let me just do my video too. Am I on video too? No, okay. Oh, there I am. Look, there you go. Okay. Just quickly, a slightly different take on the same question. It's really important to try to reach out to corporate and businesses to support a basic income. That specific question of asking a corporation or business to put money toward a basic income, that may be difficult to support, but to ask businesses to get on board as a whole, they need to be made to understand the downstream potential savings to sectors and the investment that communities like the arts community bring to the Canadian economy. So anyway, if anyone here has corporate relationships, people we should talk to, because bringing the corporate leaders on board is important and it's a hard job. So all help appreciated.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I know here in Calgary, we're trying to create strong relationships with entrepreneurs that see the value. Question, I think for Patty. Forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but Tasia P. For newer and emerging artists and smaller arts organizations in regions with lesser populations or less arts infrastructure, is there a way to prove our ability to qualify for the proposed Arts UBI?
Well, I think that the qualifications, and again, someone who's got more expertise around the specifics of the UBI should probably answer this. But I would say that, you know, to JD's point earlier, when we design from the margins, we design for everyone. So so similarly, then the conditions and qualifications for artist UBI should also be designed and co-designed on that premise.
Thanks, Patty. And I think we're going to have to leave this as our last question, but from Nadine, who, you know, she says, thanks for putting this together. And we've been getting some amazing comments from people who seem genuinely appreciative of everybody's time here today. Her worry is how racism and anti-Blackness prevent people from qualifying as artists in the first place. Would anybody like to have a quick response to that?
I could jump in if you like. So I mean, the major, you know, Western viewed systems are being deconstructed more and more every day. It needs to happen a lot more because people have to be able to see the same thing that many of you are seeing, which is applying a cultural lens to and worldview to the world, as opposed to adopting an implied shared understanding of the arts. So the idea being that more and more people have to bring self into place and make that understood what that means, so that more people can see the world from other perspectives, or at least see how other people may not share the same standards of excellence that they do. The more we deconstruct that, the more representation will take place within these places. And the more representation takes place, the more shared understandings can be built through relationships. So I mean, universal basic income is not really the place for that conversation in some ways, although I think it should happen everywhere. Obviously, when you start talking about universalism, there's always going to be unbalance. And I really, really think it's important that idea of looking at fairness and equity, once we get things into the parliamentary arena so that they're actually talking about it happening, how can some of those systemic imbalances be addressed through the initiative, but also to make sure the initiative doesn't mimic existing systemic problems. So, I mean, I think it goes across the spectrum about the institutions have to change, people have to be more open-minded, and positions of power have to be transferred to people of color, Indigenous people, you know, Black people. It has to happen. Does that help?
Thank you, Clayton. And maybe one quick last piece. Patty, could you maybe talk a little bit about the town halls that CADA has
Our
been
anti-racism town halls?
Yeah.
Sure. So Calgary Arts Development began undertaking bi-weekly, I think that's every 2 weeks, anti-racism town halls. Our next one is actually this afternoon at 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And we're talking about vocabulary and how we might understand it better. But every 2 weeks we have a theme, and it really is about increasing the sector's understanding around anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And JD is one of our contributors to that process, but today's session should be really great.
Perfect. And Zainab, we'll leave you with the very last word. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I did, and thank you for that. I just want to say how difficult the idea of racial labor, racialized labor is, and how long that fight will continue. It's not going to get solved easily, but we have to be on it. And thank you, Patty, for talking about the vocabulary, because I think that there is so much confusion. What is pluralism? What is equity? What is diversity and inclusion? What are all these different things? Let's get it right. You know, let's learn and build some of our own knowledge. It's really important that we understand how diversity and inclusion is not solving actually anything around racism. It was really brought about by the corporate world to expand their markets, and there's a huge confusion in our communities around this. So I'd say we have a lot of work to do. Let's get on with it. Let's be strong in our fight and strong in our collaborations and in solidarity with each other and with everyone out there. And let's get basic income done, folks. Let's get it done.
What a great place to end. Thank you so much, Zainab. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Sandra, Deborah, and Janice for staying a little bit late and helping with the captioning and the translations. Everybody, thank you so much. For the 118 of you that stuck around for the behind the show, have a fantastic, great day. Be safe, be kind to one another, and go and create and make a better world. Thank you all for joining us today.